Hi, my name is Ethan, and my group will be presenting on Chapter 10, which is on gays and other targets of stigma. So, according to the chapter, it lists 7 myths about homosexuality. So, the first myth is that gay men tend to be effeminate and lesbians are masculine. In other words, this means that gay men are believed to have female traits and lesbians have masculine traits. But in reality, gays have heterosexual traits of the same gender and not traits of the opposite gender. Another myth is that gay men like to molest and seduce young children. However, a majority of gay men do not have interest in young boys, just as a majority of straight men do not have interest in young girls. Most child molesters are actually heterosexual. In between 1991 and 1992 at the Children's Hospital in Denver, there was only one case of same-sex child molestation out of 387 children who were molested. The third myth is that gays play a role in sexual activities, meaning that one partner is active and the other partner is passive. However, studies show that gay and lesbian couples alternate roles. So traditionally in a heterosexual relationship, the male is the dominant one and the wife is the submissive one. Partners in same-sex marriages resemble best friends and are equal, meaning that they both cook, make money, and disclose deep feelings for each other. The fourth myth is that same-sex attraction is a mental illness. However, homosexuality is no longer considered a mental illness, and both homosexuals and heterosexuals see psychiatrists. The fifth myth is that homosexuals cannot fully enjoy sex because it is abnormal and unnatural. However, research shows that there is no difference in between homosexuals or heterosexuals' capacity to enjoy sex. Homosexuals focus more on foreplay, and heterosexuals treat sex like it is work. The sixth myth is that homosexuals are obsessed with sex. However, homosexuals think about sex just as often as heterosexuals do, if not less. Lesbian couples tend to have sex no more than once a week compared to the straight married women who have sex up to 2 or 3 times a week. The seventh myth is that people are completely straight or completely gay. However, these categories only exist within people's mind, and difference in sexual orientation is a matter of degree.
Okay, so gays and lesbians, how many are there? So, data taken from a study of a representation of the U.S. adult population, persons with the same sex feelings, which is basically people who are attracted to the same gender. We get males. We have about 6% of men, and then females 4% of women, and then persons who have engaged in the same-sex behavior, which is basically sexual intercourse with the same gender. We get 9% of men, 4% of women, and then persons with gay or lesbian self-identifications, people who self-identify themselves as a homosexual, 2.8% of men and 1.4% of women. So necessarily this is not accurate because, we live in a homophobic society and not a lot of homosexuals are open to their sexuality, so we can't conclude to say that this is accurate. And it should be also added that a data study showed that there's more homosexuality among men rather than women, but recently that did change. It's the other way around. Okay, so let's go to what are gays like. So homosexual men compared to heterosexuals, gay men tend to be more sexually active, and the book says promiscuous. So men are typically more sexually active than women, so you could logically conclude that when you have 2 men in a relationship, that's definitely going to be more sexual activity than a heterosexual relationship. And let's see. So today, research has found that typically homosexuals are in a more happier relationship because the relationship is based on more of equality. Because when you're in a heterosexual relationship, equality is not really all that there because we live in a hierarchy society, which is male-dominated, male-centered. And with homosexuals, you have equal income, you have equal decision-making, you have equal power, basically. So the marital happiness among male couples is definitely a lot happier than a heterosexual relationship. Okay? What are lesbians like? So lesbians like women. Lesbians are interested in making friends. They're like, when they go to social gatherings, they like to gossip, talk, get to know someone. They like to establish a long-term relationship. And unlike straight females, lesbians are more feminine, I guess you could say. They tend to not want to go through the traditional female role, maybe taking care of the kids, cooking, cleaning, and so on. And they are more independent, strong, non-assertive, and they most likely, yeah, like I said, feminine. And just as lesbians are more likely to reject the traditional female role, gay men are more likely to reject the traditional masculine role. And like lesbians, gay men are less likely than heterosexuals during adolescence to be aware of their sexual orientation. So that's my part on how many gays there are, and what are lesbians like, and what are gays like. So thank you, and hope you have a great day.
Hello everyone, my name is Ashley Mordejon, and I will be talking about gay and lesbians, coming out, their lifestyles, and theories of homosexuality. So for the section of coming out, in the argot of the gay community, becoming openly gay is called coming out, because it involves people publicly identifying themselves as either gay or lesbian. And in order to reach that point of identity, they must go through 4 stages of experience. The first one being sensitization. The gays start to feel different from their peers. They start to realize that they're different. The second one is dissociation. The gays begin to feel they might be gay but refuse to identify themselves that way. The third one is coming out. The gays regard their sexual feelings as gay and get involved in the gay subculture. And the fourth one is commitment. That is when they reach their adult phase in life and they are now committed to gayness as a way of life. Talking about gay and lesbian lifestyles, lesbians and gays encounter the same kind of prejudices and discriminations as other minority groups, but there is a difference. The parents of other minority groups, such as African Americans, tend to be African American. Parents of Hispanic children tend to be Hispanic. Jewish kids tend to have Jewish parents, etc., etc. However, the majority of parents that are homosexual are heterosexual. So when these homosexual children want to count on their families for support, they can't because of society's homophobia. And there are many parents who get upset when discovering their children are gay, and it can be because of society's homophobia. And there are many parents who get upset when discovering their children are gay, and it can be because they are afraid of how others may react, not necessarily because they're gay. It's just because of society's homophobia. They just don't know what to expect from others. However, these problems are less common today thanks to groups such as parents and friends of lesbians and gays, which help parents accept their child's same-sex orientation. And I'm talking about the subject of dating and marriage. It is easier for gays and lesbians to find dates in large cities rather than small towns because there are many more places that cater to gays and lesbians. And when they go on dates, lesbians and gays mostly do what straights do. They go to restaurants, they watch movies. However, they do try to decrease the amount of PDA displayed unless they're in a predominantly gay neighborhood. Now on to politics, education, and religion. Because the Democratic Party has often espoused policies sympathetic to the sexual minority, gays and lesbians are more likely to be Democrats. They are more politically active than straights are. Lesbians and gays are generally better educated because of the stress that they deal with being in a stigmatized group. It drives them into an overachiever mode. So unfortunately, sometimes because of their sexual orientation, they may lack friends, and they use that free time to study and to read. And many churches and synagogues condemn same-sex practices. Gays and lesbians belong to many different faiths. Despite of this fact, they are no more unreligious than straight people are, but they usually only attend churches and synagogues that welcome them. Now on to the topic of theories and the theories of homosexuality. Scholars and researchers try to explain why some individuals become gay or lesbian. Their explanations are classified into three major types: biological, psychiatric, and sociological theories. Biological theories are used to link biological factors to same-sex orientation. So the hormone theory suggests that gay men have lower levels of male sex hormones than straight men, and lesbians have lower levels of female sex hormones than straight women. The genetic theory suggests that people are born gay, not bred into being gay. Critics argue that the social environment contributes to the development of same-sex orientation, not biological factors. The brain theory suggests that gay men have different sizes of brains than straight men. Simon LeVay examined brain tissues from deceased gay and straight men. So he found that there were different sizes of the hypothalamus, different clusters of the neurons between both of these brains. Researchers found that the brains of gay men resemble those of heterosexual women, but the controversy over whether the structure of the brain causes homosexuality still continues today. Psychiatric theories. In 1973, the APA decided to define homosexuality as normal. However, the APA still finds that gay and lesbians are suffering from sexual orientation disturbance today. And many psychiatrists have found that most of their gay patients have disturbed relationships with their parents. And on to sociological theories. Same-sex orientation varies greatly in form and frequency from one society to another. So although it's rare here in Western society, same-sex practices have been and are common in other societies all over the world. To most sociologists, same-sex orientation is like heterosexuality, both developing from past social experiences. Only the specific nature of their social experiences differ. In short, the origin of homosexuality is both biological and sociological. Growing up to become gay is like growing up to become left-handed.
Hi, my name is Lois Navarro, and I'm going to be discussing same-sex practices within straights and bisexuals. The main premise of this part of the chapter explains that not all straights are exclusively heterosexual. And there are four groups that fall in these lines. First group are called trades. Trades are individuals who consider themselves heterosexual but engages in same-sex activities. These are individuals who like to maintain their masculine image by not having intercourse with other men, but rather have other men perform oral sex on them. These are typically men who are married or have been married and are seeking same-sex engagements just to release tension. According to Humphrey's study, most trades come from lower income families and come from a marriage where they don't have enough intercourse with their wives. Second group are called street hustlers. Street hustlers are individuals that consider themselves heterosexual but engages in a higher amount of same-sex activities. These are usually adolescent, teenage boys who like to receive money from other men to perform oral sex towards them. But they are most likely to abandon prostitution later on in adulthood. Those who still continue to engage in same-sex activities for money will later on can think of themselves as homosexual along the road. The third type of these groups are called situationals. Situationals are individuals who are dominantly heterosexual but engages in same-sex activities if the opportunity presents itself. This could be compared as engaging in a same-sex activity after meeting someone in a bar after a hard day's work. These are common within inmates, priests, and strip teasers. And the fourth group are called bisexuals. Bisexuals are individuals who are equally straight and gay. Most are most are married to the opposite sex, but engages in same-sex activities with others. It is found that in some marriages, their partners allow each other to engage in same-sex activities with others. Um, Bisexuals tend to be more sensitive and empathetic since they have more than one perspective with each group. Um, and bisexuals view their identity as legitimate and healthy, and they constantly feel that they have to make a choice, but tend to have same-sex activities with straights or gays, but not with other bisexuals.
Hi, my name is Marlon Nawagamwa, and today I'm going to be talking about the homophobic view of sexuality, the nature and extent of homophobia, and a social profile of homophobes. Talking about the homophobic view of homosexuality, it can be traced back to Judeo-Christian scripture, at least in Western society. I'll go over one line of scripture. If a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall be put to death, their blood is upon them. That was Leviticus 20:13. It can be argued that the United States is a Christian nation, and the biblical verses or verse that I just went over can kind of be attributed to some ultra-conservative or fundamentalist views on homosexuality today in the United States. Although it's not too common for homophobes to relate their homophobia back to a religious standpoint, you can definitely make the argument that that was maybe where it originated from. While religious fundamentalism is the motivating factor between some homophobes to feel homophobic, they could say that you can say that same-sex marriage and orientation would be a threat to the family unit. That family unit in the traditional sense in the United States would be a single male with a single female. They're engaged in sexual exclusivity, and the purpose of the relationship is to create and nurture offspring. And these relationships, heterosexual relationships, are supposed to be lifelong. The largest argument against homosexuality is often that no offspring can be produced. And although a homosexual couple can engage in sexual exclusivity and have lifelong relationships, this does not excuse their inability to produce offspring. This is a reproductive norm from the past when procreation was the point of having marital sex, so it follows that sex for pleasure or love is deviant. But then it's also, like, you can consider it deviant if you have sex, if you're heterosexual for love or for pleasure or masturbation or extramarital sex or oral or people that use birth control. These are all considered abominations according to Judeo-Christian scripture. So in that, you can make the argument that heterosexuals actually commit the same, if not more crimes in terms of biblical law. The nature and extent of homophobia. To define homophobia is to consider it both as prejudice and discrimination. As an attitude, homophobia is difficult to see plainly as it takes lots of different forms. In the form of a belief, it's considered abominable, evil, or unnatural, and as a feeling, it can be reacted to as a feeling of fear, disgust, or hatred. And while the attitude is a covert, anti-gay discrimination is way more obvious, like denying people jobs, calling them names, sexual assault, or hate crimes. If the attitude of belief constitutes that homosexuality is morally wrong, then nearly half of America can be considered homophobic, according to a Leland study back in 2000. A social profile of homophobes. I'll talk about that. Homophobes differ in lots of different ways, but the majority tend to fit within the same characteristics. These include they're less educated, lower class, they're conservative politically, they have negative attitudes towards racial and ethnic minorities, and they're supportive of traditional gender roles like guys got to be manly, women, got to be gentle and nice and listen and, nod their heads, yes, These are typically masculine men and feminine females, like they fit into that kind of description. They're more likely to be older, although younger homophobes do exist, but they tend to commit violence more so than older people, and they're more likely to be influenced by their peers, and they're more likely to be male. Straight men typically are more homophobic than straight women, probably because straight men are accustomed to playing the role of a masculine man, and they get angry when they're viewed as a sexual object, like a woman would, which can happen if you're in the eyes of maybe someone that's homosexual, but that's kind of what gets them upset. So, thank you.
Hi guys, my name is Brianna and I'm going to be talking about psychological problems, AIDS, gays and straights, and fighting homophobia. So for my first topic, psychological problems, homosexuality does not cause mental health problems just as heterosexuality does not. However, due to the homophobic nature of society, it does make lesbians and gays more likely to develop some psychological problems. These problems can consist of constant tension, depression, and self-hatred. Because of this, it leads to higher rates of suicide and alcohol and drug abuse among gays and lesbians than among straights. Because most gays and lesbians grow up in a predominantly heterosexual and homophobic society, they identified themselves as productive or respected members to various heterosexual groups and organizations. Unfortunately, all these self-identities are based on conformity to the heterosexual way of life. Other lesbians and gays try to resolve the identity conflict by leaving the straight world for the gay community, but many of them still feel the need to commute between their new gay and straight old worlds. Thankfully, through constant support from fellow gays and lesbians, as well as from sympathetic straights, most members of the sexual minority manage to put aside those psychological problems and live a relatively normal, happy life like most heterosexuals do. And now for my topic on AIDS, gays, and straights. Gay men were virtually all the victims of AIDS when they first broke out in the early 1980s. Today, though, gay men are much less likely to get AIDS thanks to dramatic increases in safer sex practices such as monogamy and condom use. The majority of new AIDS cases happen more among drug users, who often share their contaminated needles with each other. In the 1980s, the Homophobic Society blamed the emergence of AIDS on promiscuity among gay men. They called the disease the gay plague. Discrimination against gays visibly soared after that. Those who were actually infected with the virus or ill with AIDS also received shabby treatment from society. The U.S. Justice Department said it was legal for employers to discriminate against AIDS-infected employees if the discrimination was based on fear of contagion. Even some well-known conservatives, such as Patrick Buchanan, a conservative columnist, made a statement saying, "They have declared war upon nature, and now nature is exacting an awful retribution." He saw this as a fitting punishment for gays. Because the conservatives wanted to see gays punished with AIDS, they opposed to any government attempt to develop a vaccine against the deadly disease. They had declared that by showing compassion towards the vaccine, the government was approving and supporting gayness as a normal, legitimate lifestyle. But today, the general public has become more sympathetic to those with AIDS. An example would be that most states have passed laws protecting AIDS victims against job dismissal and other discriminations. And now on to my last topic, fighting homophobia. For more than 60 years now, gays and lesbians in the United States have been fighting for equal rights in a homophobic society. The gay rights movement began in the late 1940s with the discovery among many individual gay and lesbians that they were not alone. At first, gay and lesbian organizations focused on educating the public about same-sex orientation, counseling gays and lesbians in trouble, and providing them with recreational services. Then, in June 1969, the police raided the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar in New York, simply for serving a gay clientele. This event led many young gays and lesbians to form militant organizations. They tried to confront the country with the fact that gays are an oppressed minority group. By the mid-1970s, the militant fever had cooled, and there was renewed concern with providing counseling and other social services to gays who needed them. A dozen states had legalized consensual sex between same-sex adults. A number of court decisions upheld the gays' rights to teach. The APA stopped listing same-sex orientation as a psychiatric disorder. With the outbreak of AIDS in the early 1980s, the lesbian and gay rights movement began to shift into high gear again. Then, in the early 1990s, a few young people at the forefront of the AIDS battle began to reinvigorate the lesbian and gay rights movement with confrontational tactics, giving themselves such militant names as Queer Nation and Queer Action. They shouted their demands for equal rights in the streets, city halls, and shopping malls. They even organized a massive march on Washington in 1993. However, given the conservative climate, those gay militants may have hurt rather than helped the cause of equal rights for gays. The majority of gay rights activists are far from militant today, though. They have also emphasized the importance of equal rights in the same way as other minority groups. Thus, gays and lesbians have become an important, powerful political force.
The impact of homophobia. Homophobia strongly affects virtually all aspects of gay and lesbian life. The problems that homophobia creates for its targets can be social and psychological in nature. Due to these social problems, homosexuals have more of a struggle than straights to succeed and live a happier life within the same society. Although today being homosexual is more acceptable, they still face obstacles in their everyday life. Homosexuals face many social problems. In some states, homosexuals cannot get married, they're denied health insurance and other benefits that heterosexual couples get to enjoy. Many times they're shunned or rejected by family members and friends. In some cases, it affects their job. There's countless other problems suffered by gays and lesbians as victims of anti-gay prejudice and discrimination. A global perspective on homophobia. Homophobia in the United States makes life difficult for gay and lesbians, but the problem created by homophobia are even more serious in less affluent societies. The International Gay and Lesbians Human Rights Commission has documented many cases of abuse committed by the government in less developed countries against sexual minorities. Cases include homosexuals being raped, beaten, imprisoned, or institutionalized. Some examples of this are, in Japan, many times homosexuals are denied opportunities for housing and jobs. In Russia, a guy in Romania was arrested with his partner after releasing that they were gay. When they went to jail, they were raped. In court, the warden beat them for disclosing their rapes. 47% of the general population in Russia released that gays should be executed or isolated, and only 29% said they should be left alone. In Africa, in the nation of Zimbabwe, homosexuals were announced to have no legal rights, referred to as sodomists and perverts, also called worse than dogs and pigs. After Americans protested the Zimbabwe president responded, "Let the Americans keep their sodomists, bestiality, stupidity, and foolish ways." In Zimbabwe, lesbians are often raped and impregnated or forced to live with a man. In Egypt, men were tricked with gay-related advertisements on the internet and then arrested. In most cases, they were beaten and tortured, which sometimes led to death.
Other victims of social stigma: transgenderists, transvestites, transsexuals, and intersexuals. Transgenderism is a term that emerged in the 1990s. Those who are transgendered characterized as both sexes. This includes transsexuals, intersexuals, and transvestites. Transsexuals are those who identify as the opposite sex as they were born. Most transsexuals are men to female. This is because females are considered the primary socializer in families. Male transsexuals first feel like they're feminine, then start feeling more like they're a woman, and then finally will identify themselves as a woman. Some transsexuals take hormone treatments or have sex change operations. Intersexuals are both male and female. Those are people who are born as hermaphrodites. Most are changed at the time of birth by a pediatric surgeon, as well as surgically changed to female because the surgery is easier. Transgenderism has become a social movement. Gender reassignment surgery has changed to more about the client than what the doctor decides. Transvestites are heterosexuals who like to cross-dress. They are different from drag queens because they don't do it for show. Most are males that cross-dress to females, but they do it in private out of fear of being ridiculed by the public. Transvestites are not the only group harassed. Transsexuals and intersexuals are constantly ridiculed by normal people for being different. People with disabilities are seen as less desirable than normal people. A blind person is seen as less confident than a person who has sight. The stigma is not in the disability itself, but in the judgment. A disabled person is often seen as their disability is who they are, when that's not the case. They are more than just their disability. Unsubstantiated assumptions. The disability is solely about biology or the body. A disabled person's problems are because of their impairments. They are a victim of their own disability. Their disability defines who they are and who they hang out with. Having a disability means needing help and social support. The stigma of the disabled person is in the perception held by normal people. A disabled person is not looked at as being a normal person that has a disability, so therefore the stigma cannot be considered negative. Characteristics of normal people. Characteristics of stigma in normal people. First, a stigma is powerful. Those who are non-disabled stigmatize the disabled as powerless. The powerless, in return, look at the powerful as insensitive, stupid, or arrogant. But that cannot affect the powerful. So it does not mean that much, because unfortunately the powerful controls the powerless lives. For example, education, housing, jobs, etc. Second characteristic is stereotyping disabled as helpless, weak, and dependent. This makes it difficult for a normal person to respect the disabled and not pity them. For example, helping push a person in a wheelchair when the person did not ask for help. The pity makes it so a normal person does not commend the disabled for heroically living with their disability and achieving things in life. Third characteristic, expression through behavior in the presence of a disabled person. A normal person usually feels uncomfortable and distressed, which shows in their actions. For example, fidgeting, staring, no eye contact, avoidance, expressing sympathy, etc. Normal people also tend to make fun of the disabled. Discrimination is a very hard stigma to get through for the disabled because they deal with so much in their daily lives. Now onto the obese. 2 out of 3 U.S. adults are overweight and 1/3 are morbidly obese. The rate of obesity has doubled in the last 20 years. Obesity in children has tripled. There is now more chronic illness and health care costs due to being overweight than there is due to smoking cigarettes. This is because of overeating foods with high fats and high sugars and the lack of exercise. The social stigma to being fat has increased. Most Americans do not feel comfortable with their figures, but women suffer more from this. Anorexia has become more common because being thin is considered beautiful nowadays. In the U.S., in other developed nations, being obese is more common among the poor, but in poor countries, the rich are heavier. There is also a racial factor. African Americans tend to be heavier than whites. If the non-fat public think those who are overweight because they overeat or are lazy, then the stigma is higher. But if obesity is seen as being genetic, the stigma is lower. There are 3 consequences of stigma of being fatness. 3 consequences of the stigma of fatness. Internalization. Females will say it's their own fault for being obese, agreeing with the non-fat, but will internalize it. They are very depressed and feel isolated. Rejection. Some women will reject the stigma and form groups with each other, saying they are proud of being overweight and will fight anti-fat discrimination. Huge industry. There is now a huge industry that is based around not being fat. For example, diet pills, exercise programs, diet pills, plastic surgery, etc. Now, the tattooed. Tattoos have been popular for a long time with sailors, criminals, gangsters, etc. Tattoos are used to express a person's individuality and the things they like. But since tattoos have been associated with disreputable people, there's a stigmatization against those with tattoos. One reason for getting tattooed is to express freedom from the constraints of society. Young people view it as becoming independent from their parents. Another reason is to seem cool among their peers. The major aversion to getting a tattoo is damaging the relationships with parents and being able to get a job. 4 ways to destigmatize tattoos. 1. Condemning the condemner, blaming those without tattoos for discrimination, but this may not help to achieve the goal of being accepted. 2. Conventional motivations, justifying a tattoo because of a special meaning. For example, a memorial, a loved one, graduating college, etc. 3. Committing oneself to a conventional life can be seen in people who go to school, have a job, or do anything society views as a conventional pursuit. 4. Conforming to conventional aesthetics. Many middle-class people avoid having the antisocial, violent, or shocking behavior that being tattooed is associated with. These strategies have helped the acceptance of tattoos.